Good morning, English 149. This is Grant. And today I'm going to just kind of recap what we've been watching and talking about this week. In addition to the videos that I've posted below this, that should give you some tools to, make transitions and then export your movie. So, what you should be working on is recording your audio. And again, you can do that on your phone or within Premiere Pro. Look at yesterday's Premiere Pro videos, and they'll kind of show you how to record audio within Premiere Pro. But what I want to do is, as you're starting to put together your video, I wanted to give you these texts to think about, those of you that are writing fan fiction and also those of you that are writing about fan fiction, like, what is a good fan fiction? And I know a lot of the texts I gave you this week seem like on the surface that they're just adaptations. But what I wanted to do is bring some of the source texts involved to get you to think about how many of these stories are actually fan fictions. So let's start off with Coates. So Coates, in the June 2014 issue of The Atlantic, which I want to point to you is in the business section. One of the most famous essays that he created was The Case for Reparations. Okay. And if you have never read this, please do. It's pretty long, so that's why I didn't assign it for this class. But, what I want you to think about is Coates is really interested in dealing with history, right? Reckoning with our past. And another thing, one of his latest novels is called The Water Dancer. And I think, if you remember the ending of Black Panther, there is a lot in there about the Middle Passage and whether or not, Kilgrave would say that people should throw themselves overboard rather than come to the New World and be enslaved. So those lines and that train of thought is coming from Coates. Okay. And I don't know if you saw this at the tail end of the comic. This is the 2016 comic. By the way, this book just came out. It's a 2019 book. I think it's actually Oprah's book club novel. So if you're looking for some late summer reads, it's a very beautifully written book. But I want to, in the back of the book, in the back of the comic, which is kind of weird, is about the process of writing. And, what we want to see here is Coates is not a comic book writer, right? He's an amateur. And he brings, his mastery of language into the comic. Now, what I'm going to argue in later is I think writing fan fiction and writing in general is much tougher than something that can lean on visuals to get its narrative across. And that's why I want you to think about multimodal composition is if your professors or if your job allows you to integrate visual media into your stories or presentations, I think you should definitely do that. So you can kind of see in here that Coates really, because he's a writer, has a strength that comic book writers just don't have. And, he's also amateur. So, one way you could think of is Coates is a fan of Black Panther and he is leveraging his writing to rewrite the narrative of Black Panther, right? And like these. Oh, look, teaching evaluations. So I'll pause on that for a second. So you should be getting my teaching evaluations soon. I hope that I've done a good job of teaching this course. That's been definitely new for me, of recording these videos and figuring out how to manage the course online. So I appreciate you going on this journey with me and trying to figure out, what do we do when we're all at home and we have all these other responsibilities, jobs and whatnot to balance while we're in school. So I appreciate that. All right, so back to Coates, and you can kind of see in this, slide from the comic that the theme of reparations, the theme of the Middle Passage, all of that has to do with reckoning with history, right? And that's something that Coates inserts into the comic, okay? Because before that, Black Panther didn't have a unique storyline, right? I think this is Krull. He was a Spider-Man villain. He was also a Black Panther villain. Marvel had a lot of villains and storylines that were very similar to one another. So there was nothing in the Marvel universe before Coates came that was anything close to this kind of gravity. Okay? And so, when we get to 2018, the movie I hope you saw is pretty much taking Coates' vision of Black Panther and putting that into the visual form. Now, because this is all done under Marvel, it has the guise of being official. But when you think about who's really writing this and whose narrative this is, right? The Black Panther narrative is essentially Coates' voice. And that gets co-opted into what is the canonical text, right? And Coates did not write Black Panther. If you look at the very bottom, where they always make it the last thing you see, is two other people wrote this movie, right? And so there's this economy of writing and borrowing, and that, this is adapted, obviously, but it doesn't say adapted from, the Coates' version of Black Panther. And it's because, you think of memes and everything, and we're much more comfortable with images being circulated and redone rather than text, right? We never see the text. We're always the text is really secondary. You look at these scenes, right? There's really 3 pieces of text, and you have a whole lot of visuals. So the text is definitely taking a sideline to the visual. Okay, so there's something different being done in Black Panther, right? You have the history of Black Panther, Coates rewrites it, and then that becomes the narrative of Black Panther, right? The fan fiction, so to speak, becomes the canon because it's so powerful and so well written. Where, you have Watchmen, which is written by Alan Moore, and Alan Moore is one of the most famous comic book writers. And the reason why Watchmen was famous was it was postmodern in its anti-hero. And what I want you to think about with Watchmen is this is a scene from the comic. This is in the very beginning. You saw this. And this is from the movie, okay? So, and then the slowness, right? And then you see the smiley with the blood, And if you remember from the Watchmen movie, the Watchmen TV show, sorry, we had the badge with the blood, right? And so that's hearkening back to the original, but it changes it, right? So this is identical. You see the smiley face. You see basically Zack Snyder reshoots the comic. Okay. So this is what we would think of with adaptation, right? This is how the term is generally used. It takes, this thing and it pretty much just makes it a moving picture. Okay. Where, the series that you saw, which I'm going to spoil it a little for you, changes that story, but it still has those elements like the blood on the sheriff's badge. Where, I think I've talked to you before about Hooded Justice, and Hooded Justice in the comics and the movie is looked at as white. And the way that the TV show does that is, you can see on the right-hand side, that is Hooded Justice, and he puts makeup on his eyes so people think he's white. And so it rewrites that narrative, right? And it gives a storyline for Hooded Justice, which is not, there is no storyline for him in the comic book or the movie. So, and we have the introduction of a new character too, right? So you can think of this Watchmen as a particular type of fan fiction, right? We take a character in the background and we give them more story. And I think HBO was very smart with just naming it Watchmen. Because I think naming it and trying to create a new narrative under the guise that it is official. Alan Moore and Zack Snyder were not involved in the TV show. So again, these are good fan fictions because it's its own story, right? You can't really distinguish it from the source text. And like I said before, you can do this with images. It's pretty easy too. Now, you read for today Isolation by Ben Chan. Sorry, this image is not high quality. His book cover is really low quality, but you can kind of see the design here. And, one of the reasons why I had you do book cover is I think when you're talking about fan fiction, all the most notorious fan fictions take this extra effort of creating a cover, which kind of further gives it legitimacy, right? And so one way we could think about it is Ben Chan was smart to integrate visual elements into this text, right? He's taking, this scene that I think we're all very familiar with, and, thinks about that relationship. And, the scene was so satisfying for a lot of people that we wanted more of Hermione and Draco, right? Okay, so this is the story. And, you can kind of see the syntax here, right? Lots of really shorter sentences. There's not a lot of speech. It's all kind of flat, right? And, there's good description here, and I think that's why this is one of the more famous ones. And you can see a few stylistic details, right? There is some italics. You can see a few sentence varieties, shorter sentences and then longer. Where, when you compare this to the original, you can see that there's a lot more style here. A lot more, there's dialogue, there's narrative, there's really long sentences, there's short sentences. So the style, right, is much harder to emulate. It would be one thing, when you have the visual style, it looks the same, but it's so much harder to pull this off in text, right? You don't want to steal Rawlings' voice, but you want to emulate it. And this is very hard to pull off in text, okay? So this is why I'm going to argue that multimedia and fan fiction really should go together, because if we kind of shift fan fiction, because I think it's much harder to pull off in the text, if we shift it to more visual, I think it's going to get some more legitimacy as a genre, because I think it's a lot easier to compose in the visual. It's a lot harder. It would be different if this was a creative writing course. We would concentrate on, I think, for fan fiction, trying to emulate tone and voice, but create new stories. And that's much, much harder to pull off. So this kind of brings me to the culmination of the class. And I'm a huge fan of Rene Magritte's painting. This is called The Treachery of Images, right? And the French here says, this is not a pipe. And you can think of it in many different ways, right? The word is not a pipe, right? The text, the image are different, right? They're opposed to each other. You have the image on top and the text on the bottom. When I think of pipe, I might not think of that image. Another way you can say it is the pipe itself is not a pipe. It's an image of the pipe, right? And what I want you to think about is the treachery of images, right? Images as opposed to text, right? If I say, pipe, you can think of many different things in your mind's eye. But when I give you a visual of a pipe, it's pretty clear what I'm trying to show you. So images are a way that you can kind of circumvent, tone, all these things. And so this is where I'm going to argue, if you're using images in your fan fiction, it's much more powerful.